My husband didn't negotiate for my life. He declined it. I was on my knees in a freezing warehouse, my wrists bound, my breath fogging the air as my husband listened to me on speakerphone. The man holding the gun asked for $2 million. Not an empire, not a kingdom, just a number. My husband didn't panic. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't ask to hear my voice. He sounded bored. $2 million, he said, like he was correcting a bill. No, she's not worth that much. The call ended. I waited for the gunshot. I waited for the man in front of me to do what monsters do when something loses its value. But he didn't pull the trigger. He lowered the weapon slowly and studied my bruised face with something I didn't recognize. Not hunger, not cruelty, disbelief. Then he said, quietly, almost to himself, "It seems I'm the only one who didn't give up on you." That was the moment I understood something far more terrifying than the gun in his hand. My husband had already let me go, and the man standing in front of me hadn't. Before we begin, if stories of love, betrayal, and second chances speak to you, I hope you'll subscribe and stay with us. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your state, or even just home. Now, let me tell you the moment my marriage ended.
Chapter 1. The Price of a Wife. The concrete smelled like rust and rain. Mara couldn't tell if the wetness on her cheeks was water or blood anymore. Her wrists burned where the zip ties cut into skin that had probably stopped bleeding an hour ago, or maybe 10 minutes ago. Time had become irrelevant the moment they'd shoved her into the van outside the Whole Foods parking lot, her reusable bags scattering across the asphalt like evidence of a life that suddenly felt very far away. The phone sat on an overturned crate 3 feet from her face, speaker on, volume high enough that she could hear her husband breathing. Michael's breath. The same breath that used to fog up her neck on Sunday mornings. The same breath that had whispered vows 13 years ago in a garden full of peonies her mother had personally arranged. Mr. Hartwell. The captor's voice was smooth, professional, like he was negotiating a car lease. "We have your wife." Static crackled. Mara held her breath. "I can see that," Michael said. Not, "Oh my God," not, "Is she hurt," not even her name. "I can see that." The man holding the phone, tall, expensive coat, face she couldn't quite make out in the shadows, tilted his head, waited. His patience felt more threatening than the gun she'd seen tucked into his waistband. "The amount is $2 million, he continued, enunciating each word like he was teaching a slow child. "Transferred to the account number I'm about to send you. You have 48 hours. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. $2 million, they had it. Michael's trust fund alone could cover that 3 times over. The Hartwell family didn't talk about money, but everyone knew. Everyone always knew. "Mr. Hartwell?" the captor prompted when silence stretched too long. She heard Michael exhale. Not sharp with panic. Long. Almost annoyed. "She's not worth that much." The words landed like a slap, but worse. Slaps were hot, immediate, honest in their violence. This was cold, clinical, final. Mara's vision blurred. Not from tears, those would come later, she knew, in some locked bathroom and whatever came next, but from something breaking loose in her chest, something that had been holding her upright for longer than she'd realized. The scream stayed trapped in her throat, burning like acid. The captor lowered the phone slowly, his expression unreadable behind a single overhead light that turned half his face to shadow. He wasn't looking at the phone anymore. He was looking at her. Not with the triumph she'd expected. Not with the cold satisfaction of a man who'd just secured a payday. With confusion. "Repeat that," he said into the phone, voice harder now, stripped of its earlier polish. "I said she's not worth $2 million. Michael's voice carried the same tone he used with incompetent waiters. "If you've done your research, you know I have the money. But Mara's been difficult lately. Frankly, you've done me a favor." A favor. The word echoed in the warehouse, because she could tell now it was a warehouse, all exposed beams and broken windows high above, and somehow made the zip ties cut deeper. "Counteroffer," Michael continued, and Mara heard ice clinking in a glass. He was making himself a drink. 50,000. Final. The captor ended the call. The silence that followed was worse than anything that had come before it. Worse than the van. Worse than the zip ties. Worse than the moment she'd realized her Thursday evening, frozen pizza and a Netflix documentary about the Romanovs had transformed into this. Two other men materialized from the shadows, both younger, both watching their boss with the kind of careful attention that suggested uncertainty about what came next. "He's bluffing," one of them offered. His voice was higher than she'd expected. Nervous. Rich guys always bluff the first. "He's not bluffing." The captor's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. "I've done this 17 times. I know what panic sounds like. I know what negotiation sounds like." He turned to face his men fully, and the light finally caught his features. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that held too much intelligence for this line of work. A small scar through his left eyebrow that suggested this wasn't his first encounter with violence. But the expensive watch on his wrist suggested he'd graduated to better paychecks. "That," he said quietly, "was indifference." Mara felt their eyes shift to her. She wanted to disappear, to defend Michael somehow, to explain that he was probably in shock, that people said things they didn't mean under pressure, that their marriage had rough patches, but what marriage didn't after 13 years? But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere deep down, in a place she'd been carefully ignoring for at least 3 years, maybe longer, she knew. Michael meant every word. The captor crouched in front of her, moving slowly, deliberately, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. Wrong for a kidnapper, wrong for this whole situation. "Who touched her?" he asked, not breaking eye contact. The question hung in the air. "Boss, who touched her?" The younger one, the nervous one, shifted his weight. "It was just, you said scare her. We thought." "Did I ask what you thought?" The temperature in the warehouse dropped 10 degrees. Mara's mind raced backward, to the van, to hands grabbing her shoulders, to the moment one of them had shoved her hard enough that her head had cracked against the metal interior, to the way another had laughed when she'd whispered please, like she had any bargaining power at all. The captor stood, turned to his men, and something in his posture shifted from controlled to lethal. "Strip them," he said. "What?" "Boss, come on. Weapons, phones, wallets on the ground. Now." Mara watched, because where else could she look, tied to a chair in a warehouse at God knew what hour, as both men reluctantly complied, their items clattering onto the concrete. "You're out," the captor said simply. "No severance, no references. You're lucky I don't put you in the chair next to her and call your families. See what you're worth." One of them opened his mouth to protest. The captor pulled out his gun, not aiming, just present. They left, fast. The warehouse door slammed behind them, and then it was just the two of them in the cavernous space, rain still dripping through gaps in the roof, creating small pools on the concrete that caught the light like scattered coins. Mara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile what she'd just witnessed with what she thought she understood about her situation. The captor holstered his weapon and turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "I said scare you," he said, and his voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "I never said break you." She was terrified, and inexplicably relieved. He pulled a knife from his pocket. She flinched and moved behind her chair. The zip ties fell away. Chapter 2. The room with a lock. The hesitation lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds where Mara stood in that warehouse, wrists still burning from zip ties, staring at a man who orchestrated her kidnapping and was now asking if she wanted to go home. Home. The word tasted like copper in her mouth. She swallowed. Started again. "Yes, of course I want to go home." The lie sat between them like a third person. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but something, pride maybe, or the last shredded remains of dignity, kept her eyes locked on his. "Okay," he said finally. "Just that. Okay. Not I don't believe you. Not try again. Just acceptance that felt more unsettling than interrogation would have been." He turned away, pulling out his phone, and Mara's body sagged with relief she didn't understand. She should be screaming, fighting, demanding he call the police, release her, fix the nightmare her Thursday had become. Instead, she stood there watching him make a call, his voice too low to catch the words. She tilted her head slightly, trying to read his lips in profile. Secure location, something about 48 hours. The movement was automatic, instinctive, the same way she'd learned to position herself at dinner parties, so she could see faces, instead of just hearing muffled sounds that her damaged ear turned into useless noise. He ended the call and turned back to her, and she straightened quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. But his eyes flickered to the side of her head, the left side, where her hair was longer, where she always let it fall to cover, and something shifted in his expression. "We're leaving," he said. "I'm taking you somewhere safer." Safer, as if she'd been in danger before, as if the warehouse with its dripping rain and concrete floors hadn't been his choice. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because your husband just told everyone listening that you're not worth protecting." He picked up a jacket from somewhere in the shadows. "That makes you a liability. To him, to his reputation, to anyone who might want to use you to get to his money." "I don't understand." "You will." The car was black, expensive, the kind Michael would approve of, which made her stomach turn. Mara sat in the passenger seat, her body angled slightly so her right ear faced the driver's side. Another automatic adjustment. Another thing she'd stopped thinking about years ago. The Captor, she still didn't have a name for him, and something told her asking would cross a line she wasn't ready to cross. Drove in silence for 20 minutes before turning onto a road that disappeared into dense trees. No streetlights, no other cars, just darkness pressing against the windows like it wanted in. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere your husband can't find you." "You mean somewhere you're keeping me?" "If that's how you need to frame it." His calm was infuriating. She wanted him angry, threatening, predictable. Instead, he drove like they were heading to brunch. The house appeared suddenly, a small cabin set back from the road, lights off, surrounded by trees that looked black in the darkness. Not isolated enough to scream murder scene, but isolated enough that screaming wouldn't help. He parked, got out, opened her door, before she could decide whether to run. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, as if reading her mind. "But I need you to trust me for the next 48 hours. Trust you." The laugh that escaped her throat sounded broken. "You kidnapped me." "I did." "You tied me up." "I did." "You called my husband and demanded $2 million. And he said you weren't worth it." His voice gentled. "Which means the rules just changed." She wanted to argue, wanted to defend Michael, to explain that he was probably in shock, that people said horrible things under pressure, that 13 years of marriage had to count for something. But the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere in the past 3 hours, a truth she'd been avoiding for years had finally caught up to her. Michael had meant every word. The cabin's interior was nothing like she'd expected. Clean, warm, furniture that looked lived in but cared for. A kitchen with copper pots hanging above a small island. Windows with actual curtains. Not a prison. Not exactly a home either. Something in between. "Bedrooms upstairs," he said, gesturing to a staircase on the right. "Bathroom attached. There's clothes in the dresser. They'll be too big, but they're clean." Mara stared at him. "Whose clothes?" "No one's. I bought them yesterday." "Yesterday, before the kidnapping, before the warehouse, before everything." "You planned this," she said slowly. "I planned to scare you, to use you as leverage, to get paid and disappear." He set his keys on the counter with a soft click. "I didn't plan on your husband being a monster." The word hung in the air between them. Monster. She wanted to argue, to correct him, to explain that Michael was complicated, that their marriage had rough patches, that monster was too strong a word for a man who just didn't see her anymore. But her throat closed around the defense. Because she'd heard his voice on that speaker, heard the ice clinking in his glass, heard him negotiate her life like she was a used car he was tired of maintaining. 50,000. Final. "The door locks from the inside," the Captor continued, his voice pulling her back to the present. "You control it. I'm not coming in unless you open it." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm a criminal, not a rapist." He said it like the distinction mattered, like there was a code she should understand. "And because someone needs to show you what respect looks like." The statement landed like a punch. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, angry tears, confused tears, the kind that came when your body didn't know how to process what was happening. She turned away before he could see them fall. Upstairs, she managed. Right, second door. She climbed the stairs on legs that shook, her hand gripping the railing tight enough to hurt. Behind her, she heard him move into the kitchen, heard water running, heard the soft clink of dishes. Domestic sounds, wrong sounds for a kidnapping. The bedroom was small but perfect. A double bed with a navy comforter, a dresser with a mirror above it, a door that led to a bathroom with towels folded on a small shelf, and a lock on the inside of the bedroom door. Just like he'd said. Mara stared at it for a long moment before crossing the room and turning the deadbolt. The click echoed in the silence. She was locked in. Safe. From what? A voice in her head whispered. From him? Or from the truth waiting on the other side of that door? She didn't remember deciding to shower. One moment she was standing in the middle of the bedroom, still wearing clothes that smelled like warehouse and rain. The next, she was under scalding water, watching dirt and blood circle the drain. Her wrists were raw, bruised, the kind of marks that would take weeks to fade. Evidence. She should photograph them, document everything, build a case. Instead, she scrubbed them until they burned worse than they had in the warehouse. The clothes in the dresser were men's sizes, just like he'd said. Sweatpants with a drawstring, socks that went halfway up her calves. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Hair wet and tangled, face pale except for the bruise blooming on her left cheekbone, eyes that looked hollow. When had she started looking like this? The question whispered through her mind before she could stop it. Not tonight. Not in the warehouse. When? A soft knock on the door made her jump. I'm leaving food outside, his voice came through the wood. You don't have to eat it, but it's there. Footsteps retreated down the stairs. Mara waited 5 minutes before unlocking the door and opening it a crack. A tray sat on the floor. Soup in a real bowl, not styrofoam. Bread that looked homemade. A glass of water with ice. She carried it inside and locked the door again before sitting on the bed. The soup was still hot. She ate without tasting it, her mind elsewhere, replaying the phone call on a loop she couldn't stop. She's not worth that much. The words had carved something out of her chest, something she hadn't known was still there. Hope, maybe, or the illusion of it. She must have fallen asleep, because she woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and a moment of pure panic before memory crashed back. Kidnapped. Cabin. Lock. Michael. Mara sat up slowly, her body aching in places she'd forgotten could hurt. The tray from last night was still on the nightstand, empty except for crumbs. She'd eaten all of it. Movement downstairs, footsteps that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. She tilted her head automatically, trying to track the sound, but it came from her left side, her bad side, and disappeared into the static her ear had been producing for 6 years. 6 years since the accident. 6 years since Michael's business partner had been driving too fast on wet roads, since the car had flipped, since she'd woken up in a hospital with her left eardrum shattered, and Michael holding her hand with a guilt that would eventually calcify into resentment. I'm so sorry, he'd whispered. I'll take care of you. I promise. A promise that had turned into a prison, more complete than any locked room. Another knock, softer this time. Coffee's ready if you want it. The captor's voice came through. No pressure. No pressure. As if any of this made sense. Mara unlocked the door and opened it, expecting to find him standing there. The hallway was empty. She descended the stairs slowly, following the smell of coffee and something baking, her right hand trailing the wall in case the world decided to tilt without warning. He was in the kitchen, his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans. No jacket, no gun that she could see. Just a man making coffee in a kitchen like this was normal, like she belonged here. Mara froze mid-step. She hadn't made a sound, she was sure of it. She'd learned years ago how to move quietly, how to compensate for what she couldn't hear by controlling what she could. How did you know? She asked. He turned, and she saw his eyes flicker to the left side of her face again. That same quick glance, too knowing. Cream? He offered, holding up a mug. She should refuse, should demand answers, should do 1,000 things that didn't involve accepting coffee from her kidnapper. Yes, she heard herself say. He poured cream into her mug. Too much, the way she liked it, the way Michael had forgotten after their second anniversary, and slid it across the counter. Their fingers didn't touch. She realized as she wrapped her hands around the worn ceramic that he'd been careful about that. No contact, no invasion, no demands. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why what? Why are you being kind to me? He leaned against the counter, his own mug cradled in both hands, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable cross his face. Because someone should be, he said quietly. And Mara realized, standing in a stranger's kitchen wearing borrowed clothes, with her wrists still bruised and her heart still breaking, that she couldn't remember the last time Michael had looked at her like she was worth protecting. Her kidnapper had been in her life for less than 12 hours, and already, he'd shown her more careful attention than her husband had in years. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, something else bloomed in her chest, something dangerous and necessary and absolutely terrifying. "What's your name?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to answer. Then, "Elias." "Elias," she repeated, and somewhere in the cabin, a phone began to ring. Chapter 3. The Space Between Monsters. The phone stopped ringing before Elias could reach it. Mara watched his jaw tighten as he checked the screen, watched something dark flicker across his face before he pocketed the device without a word. "Michael?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. His lawyer. Worse, somehow. The lawyer meant strategy. Meant Michael had already moved past shock into calculation, had already started building whatever narrative would protect him when this went public. When she went missing, her mind corrected. Not kidnapped, missing. Better optics. "You should sit," Elias said, gesturing to the small dining table near the window. "Eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You didn't eat dinner last night before." He stopped, started again. "You need to eat." The care in his voice made something crack open in her chest. She crossed to the table and sat, mostly because standing felt like too much work, and watched as he pulled a tray of muffins from the oven. Blueberry. Fresh. The kind she used to make on Sunday mornings, before Michael started having business calls at 7 a.m. Before Sunday mornings became just another day, she was in the way. Elias set one on a plate in front of her, along with butter and a knife. Then he sat across from her, not beside her, she noticed, and broke his own muffin in half. They ate in silence. Mara kept her right ear angled toward him, a position so automatic she didn't realize she'd done it until she caught him noticing. His eyes tracked the movement, then he shifted slightly, adjusting his position so he was more directly in her line of sight. No questions, no comments, just adjustment. The muffin turned to ash in her mouth. The days blurred together in a way that should have felt like captivity, but somehow didn't. For 2 weeks, the routine was the same. Coffee, silence, safety. Mara cleaned because it gave her something to do with her hands. Wiped down counters that were already spotless, organized books on shelves that didn't need organizing. Found herself reading titles she hadn't touched since college. Philosophy, poetry, things Michael had called impractical in that tone that meant beneath me. Elias left her alone, not abandoned alone, present but not pressing alone. He worked on a laptop in the living room while she read upstairs, made meals that appeared on the counter with perfect timing, kept his distance in a way that felt deliberate, calculated, like he'd measured exactly how much space she needed, and decided to give her twice that. She hated that she noticed, hated more that she appreciated it. On the third day, she came downstairs to find him on the phone, his voice low but not secretive. She stood in the hallway, not hiding exactly, but not announcing herself either, and tilted her head to catch the words. "I know what the file says." His back was to her, shoulders tense. "Yes, the hearing loss. Left ear, approximately 60%. Mara's blood went cold. Happened 6 years ago. Car accident. Husband's business partner was driving. He paused, listening. "No, I haven't mentioned it. She doesn't know I know." The floor creaked under her weight. Elias turned, phone still pressed to his ear, and their eyes met across the kitchen. She saw the moment he realized she'd heard, saw something that looked almost like apology flicker across his face. He ended the call without saying goodbye. "How long have you known?" Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Since before the warehouse, you researched me. I researched your husband. You came with the package. He set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. I needed to know what I was working with. And my disability. The word felt foreign in her mouth. She never called it that, never said it out loud. Is that why you moved in the warehouse? She took a step closer. Why you always sit on my right? Why you make sure I can see your face when you talk? He didn't answer immediately, just watched her with those dark eyes that saw too much. Yes, he said finally. The confirmation should have felt like violation, like proof that this whole situation was just another man cataloging her weaknesses, deciding what she was worth based on how much effort she'd require. Instead, it felt like oxygen. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because it's not my information to tell. He crossed his arms, a defensive gesture that didn't match his tone. You get to decide who knows, who accommodates, who gets to see that part of you. Mara felt tears burn behind her eyes. Michael had known for 6 years, had watched her struggle in restaurants, at parties, in their own home, had watched her compensate and adjust and quietly disappear into the background. And he'd never once moved to her right side, never once adjusted his position so she could hear him better, never once treated her disability like something worth acknowledging, let alone accommodating. Are you waiting for the day I disappoint you? The question came out raw, unfiltered, pulled from a place so deep she hadn't known it existed. Elias's expression shifted, softened. You already survived worse than me, he said quietly. That night she slept through till morning. No nightmares about warehouses or zip ties. No waking every hour to check the lock on her door. No lying awake wondering when the kindness would curdle into expectation. Just sleep. She woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee, and the realization that her body had finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Elias was in the kitchen again, same position as yesterday, same careful distance. But when she came downstairs, he looked up, and something passed between them that hadn't been there before. Not trust exactly, not yet, but the space where trust might grow if given enough room. Morning, he said. Morning. She poured herself coffee, remembered where the mugs were now, which felt significant, and sat at the table without being asked. The lawyer called again, Elias said, 3 times. What did he say? Nothing. I didn't answer. He set his own mug down with a soft click. But he'll keep calling, and eventually your husband will want proof of life. The words landed between them like stones. What happens then? Mara asked. Depends. Elias met her eyes across the table. On what you want to happen. She opened her mouth to answer, to say I want to go home or I want this to be over or any of the things a kidnapped victim should want. But the words wouldn't come, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, something fundamental had shifted. Home had stopped meaning the house with the white columns and the garden Michael's mother had designed. Home had stopped meaning Michael at all. And the man sitting across from her kidnapper, her captor, the criminal who'd orchestrated this nightmare, had somehow shown her more respect in 14 days than her husband had in 6 years. At this point, Mara had a choice. If you were her, would you have told him the truth? Let me know in the comments. I need to tell you something, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs, about why Michael doesn't think I'm worth $2 million. About what happened 6 years ago. About why he married me. About why, her voice cracked, why I've been invisible for so long. You don't have to, I do. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, anchoring herself. Because you've been honest with me, and because, she trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because you see me, because you adjust, because in 2 weeks, you've done what my husband couldn't do in 6 years. Because somehow, impossibly, she trusted him. Okay, Elias said softly. I'm listening. Mara took a breath and started talking. Chapter 4. The Worth of Broken Things. His name was Richard Castellano. Mara's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Maybe because she'd rehearsed this confession 1,000 times in her head over the years, always imagining Michael finally asking, finally caring enough to want the full story. He never had. Elias didn't move, didn't interrupt, just watched her with an intensity that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. Michael's business partner, she continued. They were developing some property in Connecticut. Richard offered to drive me to the site, said I should see what Michael was building, that I'd be proud. The memory tasted like metal, like blood and rain and shattered glass. It was raining. He was going too fast. I remember telling him to slow down, but I don't think he heard me over the music. She touched her left ear unconsciously, a gesture so habitual she didn't realize she'd done it until Elias's eyes tracked the movement. We hit a guardrail. The car flipped 3 times. She could still feel it. The weightlessness, the world turning wrong. The moment her head slammed against the window and sound on her left side disappeared into a high-pitched whine that never fully went away. I woke up in the hospital. Michael was there. He looked. She paused, searching for the word. Destroyed. Richard had walked away with a sprained wrist, but I'd lost 60% of my hearing in one ear. The doctor said I was lucky it wasn't both. Lucky. The word had echoed in her hospital room like a sick joke. Michael blamed himself, Mara said. Said if he hadn't asked Richard to show me the site, if he hadn't been so busy, if he'd just driven me himself. Her throat closed around the rest. So he married you, Elias said quietly. Not a question. 3 months later. She met his eyes. I was still doing physical therapy for the vertigo, still learning to navigate the world with half my hearing gone, still waking up screaming because my brain couldn't process the imbalance. And you thought he loved you? I thought he would love me, eventually. The confession tasted like failure. I thought if I could just adjust enough, compensate enough, be easy enough to live with, if I could make myself small enough that my disability didn't inconvenience him. She stopped, because her voice was shaking now, and she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. But Elias leaned forward, and his expression held something that looked like rage, not at her, but for her. He married you out of guilt, he said, each word deliberate, and then spent 6 years resenting you for surviving. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Yes, Mara whispered. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, birds sang in trees she couldn't name. Normal sounds. Normal morning. Nothing about this was normal. I thought, she forced herself to continue. When you started moving to my right side, sitting where I could see you, I thought it was because you were gathering information, building a profile, figuring out my weaknesses so you could use them against you? Elias finished. Yes. He stood slowly, crossed to the window, stared out at the trees for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, raw. I noticed the first night, he said, in the warehouse. The way you tilted your head when my men spoke from your left. The way you tracked lips instead of listening. The way you positioned yourself in the car. Mara's chest constricted. I went home that night, before I brought you here, and I researched everything I could find about unilateral hearing loss, how it affects balance, spatial awareness, how people compensate, what helps, what doesn't. He turned to face her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression that made her breath catch. I didn't tell you because it's not my place to name your struggles, he continued. But I adjusted anyway, because that's what you do when you... He stopped. Started again. That's what you do for someone who matters. I'm your hostage, Mara said. But the word felt wrong even as she said it. You were my leverage. He crossed back to the table, but didn't sit. Stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Past tense. The moment your husband said you weren't worth saving, the plan changed. To what? To keeping you safe until I figure out what the fuck to do with a woman whose own husband would rather let her die than admit he's a monster. The words hung between them, sharp and true and terrible. Mara stood on shaking legs, not sure what she was doing until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the scar through his eyebrow, close enough to count his breaths. Why? She asked. Why do you care? Because someone should. His jaw tightened. Because you walked into that warehouse expecting the worst, and you still had more dignity than any person I've ever taken. Because your own husband valued you at $50,000, and you didn't scream or beg or break. He reached up slowly, slowly enough that she could move away if she wanted, and touched the bruise on her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. And because I've spent my entire life taking things from people who didn't deserve to lose them, he said softly. Maybe it's time I gave something back to someone who deserved better all along. Mara's breath caught. I'm not expecting pity, she managed, or rescue, Or, I'm not offering either. His hand dropped away, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. I'm offering respect. Space. A place where you don't have to hide or compensate or make yourself small. For how long? As long as you need. The promise settled into her bones like warmth, like safety, like something she'd forgotten existed. I didn't choose you despite your hearing loss, Elias said quietly. I chose you knowing it. Knowing you'd already survived worse than anything I could do to you. Knowing you were stronger than your husband ever gave you credit for. Mara felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, making room for something new. Something that looked dangerously like hope. She lifted her hand, trembling, tentative, and placed it over his heart. Felt it hammering beneath her palm, as fast as her own. Elias. A knock at the door shattered the moment. 3 sharp raps, precise, deliberate. They both froze. You expecting someone? Mara whispered. No, but something in his expression shifted, hardened. Actually, yes. She stepped back, confusion flooding her features. What? Another knock. Harder this time. Elias moved fast, but not to the drawer where he kept his gun. He turned, to face her fully, his expression carved from stone. They're coming, he said. Who? Everyone. I sent your husband the coordinates 20 minutes ago. His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I told him if he wants you, he has to come claim you. Mara's blood turned to ice. Why would you do that? Because you need to see him one last time. You need to see him when he's desperate. He crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands with a tenderness that made her knees weak. And you need to be the one to tell him no to his face. I don't understand. I unlocked the gate 15 minutes ago. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, careful of the bruise. The choice is yours, Mara. Hide upstairs and let me handle this. Or stand here and let him see what he threw away. Outside she heard it. Car engines. Multiple vehicles coming up the drive. What if I'm not ready? Her voice cracked. You've been ready for 6 years. Elias leaned his forehead against hers, just for a moment. A breath. You just didn't know it yet. Then he stepped back, giving her space to decide. A woman's voice cut through the door, clear and familiar and impossible. Hello, Elias. We need to talk about what you've stolen. Mara's blood turned to ice. Because she knew that voice. Had known it for 13 years. Michael's mother was standing in the doorway. And behind her, Mara could hear more voices. More footsteps. The past had arrived to collect its debts. And she had to choose whether to pay them. Chapter 5. The Cost of Dignity. Catherine Hartwell didn't knock a third time. She simply waited, the kind of waiting that came from decades of getting exactly what she wanted by standing in doorways until people surrendered. Mara's hands shook, but she didn't move toward the stairs, didn't run, didn't hide. Elias's words echoed in her mind. You need to be the one to tell him no to his face. He was right. She'd spent 6 years being invisible, being convenient, being small enough to fit in Michael's life without disturbing anything important. Not anymore. Elias moved to the door, and Mara positioned herself behind him but not hidden. Right side forward, the way she'd learned to stand so she could hear, so she could see, so she could exist in a world that wasn't built for her body's limitations. He opened the door. Catherine stood on the threshold in Hermes heels and a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her eyes swept past Elias and landed on Mara with the precision of a surgeon identifying a tumor. So she is alive, Catherine said. How disappointing. The cruelty was so casual, it almost didn't register. Almost. Mrs. Hartwell, Elias said, his voice cold, professional, the same tone he'd used on the ransom call. You weren't invited. Don't insult me with semantics. Catherine's heels clicked against the threshold. She hadn't been invited in, but she moved like she owned the space anyway. You sent my son coordinates. That's an invitation. Behind her, Mara could see more figures emerging from cars. Private security. 3 of them, buzz cuts and dead eyes. And then, Michael. He looked exactly the same. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. But there was something else now. Something desperate in the way he scanned the cabin, in the way his gaze locked onto Mara like she was a life raft. Mara, He said her name like a prayer, like he'd been practicing. Thank God. I've been going insane. Are you hurt? Did he? Don't. Elias's voice cut through the performance. Don't pretend you were worried. Michael's expression flickered. Of course I was worried. She's my wife. Your wife who wasn't worth $2 million. Elias pulled out his phone. Your wife you valued at $50,000. Your wife you said had done you a favor by getting kidnapped. That was a negotiation tactic. It was the truth. Elias's finger hovered over his phone screen, and I have proof. Catherine moved fast, her hand shooting out, but Elias was faster. He stepped back, phone raised like a weapon. You think you can blackmail us? Catherine's voice could have cut glass. The Hartmels have attorneys who, I don't want your money. Elias's voice was quiet, dangerous. I wanted to scare a rich man. Instead, I found out he's a monster. Plans changed. I liberated a woman from a man who let her get brutalized rather than pay for her safety. He glanced at Mara, something fierce and protective in his eyes. There's a difference. Legally, no. Catherine's tone sharpened. Morally, I don't give a damn. But practically, Mr. Torres, yes, I know who you are. You've made a mistake. Mara felt Elias tense beside her. Because I'm not here for negotiations, Catherine continued. I'm here because my son is about to perform the role of his life. Devoted husband, desperate to save his beloved wife. And you, she turned her gaze to Mara, are going to play your part. No, the word came out stronger than Mara expected. I'm not. Catherine's eyebrow arched. I said no. Mara stepped forward, moving past Elias's protective stance. I'm done playing parts in Michael's life. Michael surged forward, and one of the security guards moved to intercept. But Elias was already there, a hand on the man's chest. Touch either of them and you leave here in pieces, Elias said quietly. The guard hesitated, looked to Catherine for direction. She nodded once, and the guard stepped back. Michael stood in the doorway now, close enough that Mara could smell his cologne, the same expensive brand he'd worn for years, the one that used to make her feel safe and now just made her nauseous. Sweetheart, he said, and the endearment felt like insects crawling across her skin. I know you're confused, traumatized, but you're safe now. I'm taking you home. Sweetheart, he hadn't called her that in 4 years. Did you hear me? Mara's voice came out steady. I said I'm not going. Michael's perfect mask flickered. Mara, you've been through hell. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 6 years. She took a step forward, and Michael instinctively stepped back. Good. You told him I wasn't worth $2 million, she said, each word a hammer. Your exact words were, she's not worth that much. I was negotiating. You were pricing me. Her voice rose, years of silence finally breaking. Like a used car, like furniture, like something you were tired of maintaining. That's not... Michael reached for her, and Elias moved like lightning, his hand catching Michael's wrist. Don't, Elias said softly. Touch her. Michael yanked his hand back, and for a moment, Mara saw real fear cross his face. He recorded it, she continued, her voice stronger now. Every word, every pause, every time you took a drink while deciding if I was worth the inconvenience. Mara, please. Michael's composure was cracking. We can discuss this at home, privately. You don't understand what you're throwing away. I understand perfectly. She crossed her arms. I'm throwing away a man who priced me at $50,000, who married me out of guilt and spent 6 years resenting me for surviving, who never once, her voice broke, but she pushed through, who never once moved to my right side. The specificity of it seemed to hit Michael like a slap. Your, what? My right side. Mara gestured to her left ear. 6 years, Michael. 6 years I've been struggling to hear you, to hear anyone, and you never noticed. Or you noticed and didn't care enough to adjust. I didn't know. You knew. The words came out like a roar. You were there in the hospital. You signed the medical forms. You watched me do physical therapy for the vertigo. You knew, and you just didn't care enough to remember. Michael's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in their entire marriage, he had no response. Catherine stepped forward, her voice ice. This is very dramatic, and it'll be over soon. Mara. But it's also very stupid. You think running to your kidnapper makes you brave? It makes you pathetic. Mother, Michael started. No. Catherine's eyes locked on Mara. You want to leave? Leave. But you'll leave with nothing. No money, no house, no reputation. I'll make sure every person who matters knows you had an affair with your captor. Stockholm Syndrome. Mental breakdown. Pick your narrative. I'll make it stick. Mara felt Elias move closer, a protective presence at her back. Worth it, she said quietly. Catherine's expression flickered. What? It's worth it. Mara straightened her shoulders. Everything you'll take, everything you'll destroy, it's worth it to never hear his voice again. To never make myself small enough to fit in his life. To never wait for him to finally see me as worth protecting. She turned to Elias, saw something fierce and proud in his eyes, then turned back to Michael. Play the recording, she said. Mara, play it. She looked at Elias, loud, so they can't pretend it didn't happen. Elias pulled out his phone, found the file, and pressed play. Mr. Hartwell, we have your wife. Static. Breathing. I can see that. Mara watched Michael's face as his own voice filled the cabin, watched him realize what was about to happen, watched him understand that control had shifted. The amount is $2 million. The security guards shifted uncomfortably. Even Catherine had gone still. She's not worth that much. The words hit different in the daylight. Colder, more calculated, more true. If you've done your research, you know I have the money. But Mara's been difficult lately. Frankly, you've done me a favor. Ice clinking, a drink being poured. Counteroffer, $50,000, final. Elias stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael's face had gone white. You can't. I already did. Elias's voice was flat. I sent it to 3 journalists, a lawyer, and your PR firm, about 30 minutes ago, right before I sent you the address. Catherine's phone began to ring. Then Michael's. Then one of the security guards' radios crackled to life. Sir, we have press at the main gate. Multiple outlets. They're asking about a recording. Michael's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, stared at the screen, at the notifications flooding in. His perfect life, fracturing in real time. What have you done? He whispered. Told the truth. Elias said simply. Michael looked up, and for the first time, Mara saw him truly desperate. Saw the careful mask he'd worn for years completely shatter. Baby, please. He moved toward her, hands raised like a supplicant. Listen to me. I was scared. I panicked. I thought if I played it cool, if I didn't seem desperate, he wouldn't hurt you. It was strategy. I was trying to protect you. By pricing me at $50,000, I have the money right here. Michael was pulling out his phone now, fingers flying across the screen. 2 million, 5 million, whatever you want. The jewelry I promised you last year, it's in the car. That trip to Lake Como you wanted, I booked it this morning. First class, the presidential suite. Anything you want, just please. He dropped to his knees. Actually dropped to his knees in the doorway of a stranger's cabin. Designer suit collecting dust. Perfect hair finally showing cracks. Please don't look at me like that, he whispered. Mara stared down at him, at this man she'd loved, or thought she'd loved, or convinced herself she should love, because he'd married her when she was broken, and felt absolutely nothing. You're offering me a vacation? Her voice was quiet, deadly. You should be offering me a lung, and even then, I wouldn't take it. Mara, I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael's face crumpled. You don't mean that. You're upset, traumatized. When you've had time to think? I've had 6 years to think. She looked at Elias, at the man who'd shown her in 2 weeks what her husband couldn't manage in 6 years. I'm done thinking. I want a divorce. I'll sign whatever prenup clauses you want. Take nothing. I just want my name back. My freedom back. My life back. Catherine's voice cut through the moment like a blade. You'll regret this. Maybe, Mara said, but at least I'll regret my own choices, not his. Outside, the chaos was escalating. More cars, more voices, the particular sound of a media circus descending, and then, cutting through it all, a woman's voice, high, panicked. Everyone froze. Mara turned to see a blonde woman shoving past the security guards, designer bag swinging, makeup streaked with tears. Michael, you said you'd call. The woman, 28, maybe 30, polished in a way that cost money, stopped short when she saw the scene. You said after this was handled, we could finally. She saw Mara, saw Michael on his knees, and her face went white. Oh God, she whispered. Michael stood so fast he stumbled, Danielle, not now. When then? Danielle's voice cracked. You said you'd leave her. You said after the charity gala, after the murder, after she was... She stopped, looked at Mara. You're alive. Disappointed? Mara asked. Danielle's face crumpled. No, he said you were miserable, that the marriage was over, that you wanted out as much as he did. He lied, Mara said simply. I loved you, Danielle said, wheeling on Michael now, tears streaming down her face. I rearranged my entire life for you, and you can't even... A camera flash cut through the scene, then another. Press. Real press, not Michael's carefully curated PR team. Someone had tipped them off. Mara looked at Elias, who shrugged slightly. I may have sent them the address along with the recording. Michael lunged for Danielle, trying to pull her toward a car, but she yanked free hard enough to stumble. Don't touch me. She was sobbing now, mascara running, designer clothes disheveled. I gave you everything, and you can't even look at me like I'm real, like I'm worth... She stopped, looked at Mara, and something passed between them, an understanding. Two women who'd learned the same lesson about the same man. 50,000, Danielle said quietly. That's what she's worth to you? What am I worth, Michael? 30, 20? More camera flashes. Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Catherine was already moving toward her car, damage control mode fully activated, phone pressed to her ear. And Mara stood in the doorway of a cabin that wasn't hers, wearing borrowed clothes, bruises fading on her wrists, and watched her marriage burn to the ground. Would you have let him grovel? Would you have listened? Or would you have walked away, knowing some apologies aren't worth hearing? Get out, Mara said quietly. Michael turned to her, desperate. Mara, please, get out. Elias didn't move, didn't pull his gun, didn't make threats. He just stood beside her, solid and certain, and waited. Michael looked between them, saw the way Elias positioned himself on her right side, saw the way he'd angled his body so she could see his face, saw all the small adjustments a stranger had made that her husband never had, and finally he understood what he'd lost. You're making a mistake, Michael said, but his voice had no conviction left. Then it's mine to make, Mara said. Catherine appeared in the doorway one last time. Michael, now, before this gets worse. Mara thought he might refuse, might make one more desperate play for control. But then his shoulders sagged, and Michael Hartwell, who'd spent 6 years playing the devoted husband, finally walked away from the marriage he'd never wanted. Chapter 6. The Woman Who Knew Her Worth. The cabin felt impossibly quiet after they left. Mara stood at the window, watching the convoy of cars disappear down the dirt road, trailing press vehicles like a funeral procession. Behind her, Elias hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't touched her, giving her space to process, to breathe, to be sure. The sun was setting now, painting the trees in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful, peaceful, wrong somehow for the magnitude of what had just happened. You okay? Elias asked finally. Was she? She'd just destroyed her marriage, rejected millions of dollars, walked away from a life most people would kill for, and she felt light. Yes, she said, and was surprised to find it was true. She turned to face him, this man who'd kidnapped her and somehow set her free in the same breath. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, careful, uncertain, waiting for her to decide what came next. Thank you, she said. For what? For not deciding for me. She crossed to him slowly. You could have locked the door, kept me hidden, made the choice easier. That's not love, Elias said quietly. That's just another kind of prison. Love. The word sat between them, unnamed but undeniable. I don't know what happens now, Mara admitted, stopping just within reach. I don't have money or a plan or any idea how to rebuild a life at 42. You have yourself. Elias's hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching, waiting for permission. That's more than most people ever get. She leaned into his palm, felt his fingers cradle her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. I'm a criminal, he said. I kidnapped you, destroyed your husband's life, made you choose between everything you knew and this. You showed me what I was worth, she corrected. You adjusted your entire world without asking me to explain my brokenness. You gave me space to be angry and scared and confused without demanding gratitude. Mara, I'm not saying I'm choosing you, she interrupted. Not yet. Not until I know who I am without anyone defining me. Without being someone's wife, or someone's burden, or someone's... Her voice broke. Elias pulled her into his arms, and she went, burying her face against his chest, breathing in cedar and safety. I'll wait, he said against her hair, as long as it takes, however long you need to figure out who you are when no one's pricing you. Mara pulled back just enough to see his face. What if I'm boring? What if without all the drama and trauma I'm just ordinary? Then I'll love ordinary. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I'll love the woman who reads poetry at 2 a.m., who makes coffee too strong, who reorganizes my bookshelves without asking. You notice that? I notice everything about you. The confession settled into her bones like warmth. How to be with someone without owing them, without needing to earn my place. Then we'll figure it out together. Elias leaned his forehead against hers. No debts, no transactions, just us, whatever that looks like. What if it doesn't work? Then it doesn't work. His hands framed her face now, his eyes locked on hers, but at least we'll fail on our own terms, not because someone decided you weren't worth the effort. Mara felt something break open in her chest, not pain, but release, like a door she'd been holding closed for years, finally swinging open. Kiss me, she whispered. Elias went very still. You sure? He kissed her like she was something precious, like she was worth $2 million and then some, like her value couldn't be quantified or negotiated or reduced to a number in a bank account. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mara realized she was crying. Hey, Elias murmured, brushing tears away with his thumbs. Talk to me. I'm happy, she said, and laughed at the absurdity of it. I just blew up my entire life and I'm happy. Good. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. You deserve to be happy. So do you. Then I guess we're both getting what we deserve. They stood there as the sun set, wrapped in each other, and Mara thought about all the ways her life could have gone. All the versions of herself that would have stayed, that would have believed Michael's grovel, that would have taken the jewelry and the trips and the promises and convinced herself it was enough. But standing here, in borrowed clothes with bruises fading and a future completely uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She'd made the right choice. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Mara signed the papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and old money, wearing a dress she bought with money from her first paycheck at the literacy nonprofit where she now worked. Michael wasn't there, sent his lawyer instead. Catherine had made good on her threats. Rumors about Stockholm Syndrome, about mental breakdowns, about affairs had circulated through their social circle like wildfire. Mara didn't care. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them believe whatever narrative made them comfortable. She had her name back, her freedom, her life, and she had Elias, not as a savior, not as a replacement for what she'd lost, just as himself. They'd taken it slow, deliberately. Mara had moved into a small apartment, her own place, her own lease, her own life. Elias had respected her need for space, for independence, for the chance to figure out who she was when no one was defining her. But he'd been there, every step, always on her right side, always adjusting without being asked, showing her, day after day, what it meant to be with someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. They ate dinner together most nights, talked until 2 a.m. about everything and nothing, built something new from the ashes of what had been. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice it happening, Mara fell in love. Not with the idea of him, not with what he represented or what he'd saved her from. With him, with the man who made terrible coffee and left books open face down and hummed off key in the shower. With the man who'd committed crimes she probably shouldn't forgive but couldn't quite regret. With the man who'd shown her that her worth wasn't negotiable. On a quiet Tuesday in spring, Mara opened her laptop and started writing. Not therapy homework. A story. About a woman who got kidnapped and found herself instead. About a man who knew her price and decided she was priceless. about the difference between being claimed and being chosen. She wrote for hours, words pouring out like they'd been waiting years to escape. And when she finally stopped, exhausted and exhilarated, she realized Elias was standing in her doorway with coffee. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Long enough." He crossed to her, set the mug down on her desk, kissed the top of her head. "You're glowing." "I'm writing. I can see that." He read over her shoulder, and she let him see the words that were half confession, half catharsis. "This is good, Mara. Really good." "You think so?" "I know so." He crouched beside her chair, eye level now. "You're going to help a lot of people with this. A lot of women who think their worth is tied to what someone else decides to pay for them." Mara looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd started as her worst nightmare and become her best decision. "I love you," she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud. Elias's expression softened. "I love you too. Even though I'm ordinary, you were never ordinary." He kissed her softly. "You just convinced yourself you had to be small to deserve love. And now you're exactly the right size." He stood, pulled her to her feet. "Come on, I made dinner." "You can't cook." "I can order takeout and plate it nicely. It's a skill." Mara laughed, let him lead her to the kitchen, and thought about the recording that had started it all. She's not worth that much. The man who'd said those words, who'd priced her, discarded her, tried to buy her back when it suited him, had taught her the most valuable lesson of her life. He'd taught her the value of walking away. The man who said I wasn't worth the price taught me the value of walking away. And the man who knew my worth taught me that some things, some people, are priceless. The end. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar, I hope you know you're not alone. Stories like this are told here often. Stories about love that hurts, love that heals, and love that finally chooses us back. If you'd like to hear more, you're always welcome to subscribe and stay a while. And before you go, I'd love to know, where were you listening from today?